If you were to look back 3 to 5 years from now and you were to say that this coaching conversation with me today changed everything for you about your LSAT prep and your law school journey, what would need to happen for you?
Uh, I think I think what I would need is to get into, because I think the most important thing is like mindset. Because once that like falls apart, like everything goes downhill. It's like nothing you study will like kind of, or at least for me, anyways, it won't stick unless like I get like why it's sticking, like the reasons behind it. So like part of the reason why I like used your courses and I found them so useful was because you weren't like teaching like, oh, this is how you do and necessary assumption, or this is how you do this. It's like you need fundamental skill of understanding stimulus, then question, then the answer choices kind of look dumb after a while because you realize they're making like the same like not errors, but they're changing it in the same way. That's what I've noticed.
I'm really glad you found that approach helpful. And I agree with you. It is all about the mindset. So, what do you think you could change about your mindset, or what do you need to change about your mindset in order to understand the exam on a deeper level?
I think one of the biggest things is like when you like approach a problem and like for instance you're not 100% sure how to go about it, instead of kind of like it's not like freezing or like I guess it's like when you rabbit hole and and you go all in on one technique and you realize later, oh, that's not the way I should have approached that at all. It's like, you're arguing with yourself. You're trying to say like, oh, I shouldn't be doing this, but also you want to be confident in your ability. So kind of like balancing that out is like can be really difficult for like the more tough questions.
Do you ever find that on these tough questions, you're getting really bogged down?
Yes, it's not so. It's like the moment when I realize, hey, there's more than like a 50% shot of me not getting this. I'm kind of like not in panic, but I'm in like I don't know. Like I'm gonna try, but like there's only so much I could do, and it's either like I read something wrong or like there's a lack in like fundamental like knowledge, but that's not as much the case anymore.
Right. Well, that's good to hear that it's improved. But this moment of panic where you're bogged down on a question and not making headway on it, just first off, know that that's normal.
Mm.
And that happens to me too sometimes, especially under
That's
time.
very good to hear.
I'll typically flag 3 to 4 difficult logical reasoning questions within a single section. And I'll flag them, put them aside, and come back to them at the end. So I think it's really about recognizing that in that moment to break out of the tunnel you're going down, the tunnel vision, and see this is not happening for me right now. This is going to be one of those 3 to 4, and just make a decision to move on from it and come back to it later.
Mhm.
And part of that comes down to seeing the patterns and types of questions where this happens to you. Do you notice it happening on certain questions rather than others?
It's so I don't know it's like all the situations that happen, but the most identifiable one is usually in like I believe it's parallel reasoning where the questions are just like half a page long, and it's like I'm not gonna lie, I just don't focus that well when reading like the longer prose. I have a hard time with RC, but I'm working on it. But like when it's just like one like LR question that's like that long, my brain is kind of just like, we're gonna get through it, but it's gonna take like a lot longer just to retain like because every answer choice is like almost like a short question to them at that point.
Yeah, it's true. When you do parallel reasoning, you're reading 6 stimuli for the benefit of 1 point. And so if it's question 20 or question 23, where it's going to be more difficult as well, it is worth likely flagging that one and coming back to it at the end. I like to flag those long ones too, if it's parallel or principal application. If it's in that last third of the section, yeah, it's one that I'll likely skip and come back to later. For me also, I don't know, what's the case for you? I mean, I find science ones, aestheticism, philosophy. What do you,
Uh,
in terms of topics?
so it's not so much the topic; it's like it, not the grammar per se, but it's like when the way that they write it, there's like a steep drop off to where like more abstract. It just like it takes me way longer just to like connect the things. I guess it's worth mentioning because English is not my first language. So I like in my brain, I'm having to do like a double, triple translation, and like the abstract stuff is usually like all throughout schooling. It's like messed me up, and like it messes me up now. But you gotta work with what you got, right? So I try to just attach like kind of like nonsense words just to get through the structure, and then go back to it, attach all the things so I at least know like how it's trying to argue.
Right, exactly. And the abstract language stuff, that messes up native speakers too. Definitely. Those are ones that I would also flag if they're later in the section. And so you have what to be on the lookout for. And it sounds like we're actually pretty similar in this regard. Parallels, maybe principal applications, anything taking up half the page, and questions with stimuli involving abstract language. When you see those, if it's not clicking immediately, make it a candidate to flag. Or maybe just have a general rule. Anything after question 16 of this nature, I will skip and come back to. That's fine. Just have your 3 to 4, and then also make sure you're working at a fast enough pace where you will ideally have time to come back to those at the end.
Question for when you flag stuff, do you just read the stimulus and the answer choices, or do you read the stimulus, like kind of see the stem and then make a decision on, or like do you do the whole thing and then like make your decision, flag or not flag, and then move on?
That's a good question. I don't know that I actually have it worked out quite that precisely. I mean, I typically read the question stem first. So given that, I'm reading it no matter what. But for me, it's really about, is the stimulus so confusing that I cannot form an abstracted general principle out of it, or I don't really get the method of reasoning that's going on there in that moment. And then with a fresh perspective, coming back to it at the end, I can typically make it click. Because it's a new way to look at it, plus I'm giving it more time. And so that will help make it click, and then I'll see the trick to it later, of course. And over time, you look to improve this so that maybe it might be 5 or 6 right now like this in a section. Maybe you can reduce it to be ideally 3 to 4 or less. And then at the same time, like I said, you're also making sure that you're moving at a fast enough pace on the easier ones so that you will have that time bank remaining. Another thing I want to mention is related to abstract language. As an exercise, you could just go through an entire exam, and for every keyword or phrase that you don't understand, define it for yourself. Take the time to define it, because of course, these things repeat. There's abstract logic-related language like antecedent, consequent, necessary, sufficient. There are descriptions of classic logical fallacies. Those are definitely things to get down. And then of course, the more philosophical related topics, those will typically have abstract language as well. It's worth looking up those words too, because although they're less likely to repeat, they still could.
Gotcha. There will be cases where, for instance, I was looking at your, I believe it was the 5 hardest LR questions.
Yeah.
And I remember the one that was on like, it was on fish and like the hormones, and the answer was like going downstream. And I was like, I'm not gonna lie, I understand like how they got it, but like I don't think I'd be able to do that. Not like me right now, maybe me in like 2 months, but I'm not really sure how it even like get to that point,
Yeah, sure. Well, of course, know that that is one of the most difficult questions of all time, especially for a number 12. And that method of reasoning relates to thinking outside the box. It's new. The weakener is new information. So it's not something that you would have necessarily had to predict, especially on such a random topic as that. The point is to recognize it when you see it, and then also eliminate the other choices.
Gotcha. Yeah, because like when I was reading the other choices, I remember the very first one was like super weak, but it could like I could see myself like making the argument. It was about like, oh, big fish companies are just like trying to like skew the data, or something related to that. And I thought that sounds like a trap answer, but I don't even know like what the 4 other answers would be. But I don't think A is right, and it wasn't right in any case. But yeah.
A lot of times, typically on weakened questions, 1 will weaken, 4 don't, or for strengthening questions, 1 strengthens, 4 don't. But on tougher questions, sometimes 1 will weaken a little bit, but the correct one weakens far more. And that was the case for this one, I imagine. I don't remember what choice A was saying, but in general, there's going to be the one that weakens will definitely weaken a significant amount. The correct answer, of course.
Gotcha. Yeah. because like for that specific question where it did weaken, it was kind of like you needed to read in between the line, and then if you got that, then it completely destroys the argument. Otherwise, you'd be like me where you think the trap answer looks pretty good at that point.
Yeah. I think in general, with these sorts of causal arguments, it's about being open to additional considerations.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, it's about, and same with like correlation causation arguments, alternate possibilities, alternate explanations. Is the causality reversed? Is there a third variable? Is it simply a coincidence?
Mm-hmm.
So LSAT's all about problematizing things.
Is it very common for like for weaken or strengthen questions for the matter to have like a little strengthen or a little like weaken, and then like the one that like destroys or like completely makes the argument, versus like the one where you said it's generally four that just completely off mark and one that does a little bit or just does it for like strengthen or weaken?
I want to be careful about the idea of destroying the argument or guaranteeing the argument, because weakened questions, the job of a weakener is not to destroy the argument. It's just to significantly problematize the reasoning. Now, it might problematize it 20%, or it might problematize it like 55%.
Right.
But the tempting wrong answer may weaken it like 2%.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, you can't really put numbers on these things, but I would say, especially for logical reasoning, you do want to go through all five in order to be sure that you're not missing out on something.
Gotcha.
Does that address your question?
Yes, as much as we could get for like right now anyways.
Yeah, sure. Now we're pretty much at time, but I do want to address it just in general, this general question of mindset, and see if there's anything else I could share with you related to that.
Yeah, I guess like kind of relate, or like the situation where I was trying to explain before, you narrow it down to two questions, and it's like you can reasonably explain either or. You pick the one that you go with, you try to explain it, you try to explain the other one, you get it wrong. Naturally you're a little disappointed, but how do you just get over that hump and not like, be like demotivated for like the rest of the session or what have you?
Yeah, sure. Well, just know first off, this is the most difficult exam you've likely taken up to this point. And it's harder than any other grad level exam, like the GRE, the MCAT, the GMAT. This is much harder than any of those. And the curve on this exam is ridiculous. The idea that you could only get 90% accuracy, yet be in the 97th percentile is pretty crazy. It's a difficult exam. So know that, and know that typically most people are going to get a ton of questions wrong. And if you're drilling difficult questions, obviously your accuracy rate is going to be even lower. So just be aware of what you're putting yourself up against. Also note that this exam is not a test of your intelligence. It's a test of pattern recognition. Because especially under timed conditions, you're seeing difficult methods of reasoning, and it's hard to puzzle it out for the first time given the severe time constraint. What separates someone like me from someone like you is nothing more than having much more experience with the exam, so that when I see a new question, I'm automatically relating it subconsciously back to all the other questions I've ever done up to this point. And so there might be methods of reasoning that come up only once every 7 exams, or once every 10 exams, or once every 20 exams. And so if you've only done a couple dozen exams, you may not have seen that method of reasoning enough times to start building that pattern into your brain. So a lot of it, this is simply a matter of exposure, kind of like on a really difficult logic games rule. Like the contrapositive, you've done enough by this point. But there are more complicated conditional statements like biconditionals or X or Y, but not both, where they come up a little bit less frequently, or like if A is before B, then B is before C, but only if blah, 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 etc. Yeah. Like if you're puzzling through that the first time, it's going to be really hard. But the goal is you puzzle over it now where there are really no stakes, so that on test day, you've done it 5, 10, 20 times, so that you're just automatically applying the formula and you know exactly how to handle it.
Gotcha. All right. Yeah, that's probably exactly what I needed to hear. It's just like, just go through the stuff for now, because it's not going to be like this forever. And I have noticed this, which is I mean, if my score just didn't get like better like through the whole like 2-3 months, then yeah, there would be an issue. But it has, so it's working despite the fact that it seems like it's not working right now.
It just takes more time than people typically expect. Most people want to devote 2 to 3 months to this, but it really takes closer to 5 to 6 months at minimum in order to reach your fullest potential. So you put time, you keep exposing yourself to it, and you'll get there in the end.
All right, gotcha. All right, thank you so much, Steve.
My pleasure, Kevin. What would you say is the biggest insight you got from our session today?
The biggest insight is, I would say it's kind of like the mindset and realizing that you're building more knowledge even when you get stuff wrong, because you'll know like what's right. Like after, even if you get it wrong, you'll be able to see why you got it wrong, what the right one is, and then over time, you'll hopefully be able to apply it come like test day. That's probably the biggest thing.
I'm glad to hear it, Kevin. Please keep at it.